Who would have thought that a company, once making one of the fastest and most ingenious Grand Prix motorcycles, ends up making coffee racers and kind of bikes that resemble more of a Harley than a sports bike. A company that was the first to develop a motorcycle wind tunnel and once had a large factory of 800 machine tools. No, Moto Guzzi no longer is what it used to be about 60 to 70 years ago, when they dared to build something that nobody else was capable of. Okay, I'm pulling your leg a bit. In 1938, there was a two-stroke V8 attempt by Galbusera by doubling up a V4 unit. It had a production-ready 28 horsepower 500cc engine, which however never happened. A similar machine would not appear for over a decade, when Moto Guzzi's ambitious and remarkable engineer Giulio Cesare Carcano, who also designed Guzzi's typical air-cooled V-twin, sketched a new engine. The objective was to replace an outdated 120-degree Bicilindrica from 1930s. As Carcano knew, it was already the end for the 500cc singles and twins. Guzzi aimed for an advantage and looked into 6s and V8s. The straight 6 was too wide, and a water-cooled V8 seemed doable, at least on paper. The development began after the 1954 Monza Grand Prix with the help of factory engineers and racers such as Enrico Cantoni, Umberto Todero, Ken Kavanaugh, and Fergus Anderson. The small team managed to manufacture a fully working prototype in just 5 months, and the press received a teasing letter just before the 1955 Grand Prix season. The new Moto Guzzi V8 was like nothing else before. The motorcycle frame was of a recently introduced design with a central tubular backbone, which would then hold a duplex steel cradle, a triangulated rear subframe, and a swing arm pivoting from the crankcase. The engine was placed transversely in the frame, and thanks to that, it was easily to place the bronze-guided pivot. It was one of the interesting design features of Carcano's engine drawing, and certainly helped with the stiffness. As a V8, its bang angle was set at 90 degrees, resulting in even firing intervals, but sacrificing a more compact footprint. The magnesium casting housed both the transmission and the crankshaft assembly, which rotated on 5 main bearings. According to the original sketch, the crankshaft was of a 180-degree design and carried con rods on the roller bearings. The crankshaft would be slid in from the side and then bolted up on the middle 3 bearings. The other 2 were on the side crankcase covers. The 44mm pistons had a large dome to cope with a wide valve angle of 58 degrees. There is no number for the compression ratio, although a single source mentions a crazy high figure of 11.5 to 1. To assure perfect head sealing, the cast iron liners were screwed in the heads from underneath and then placed into the crankcase. The valve train was also carefully made. It was driven by spur gears, and there were 2 camshafts per head. Moto Guzzi had an experience with multi-valve setup, but to avoid excessive complexity, Carcano decided to go with the 2 valves per cylinder setup. There were 23mm inlet and 21mm outlet valves operated by bucket tappets, twin coil springs, and running no valve seat inserts, simply acting on the aluminum in the head. The engine was water-cooled and the radiator was placed low down in the front. Complexity was the V8's second name, but anyhow, with a weight of about 50 kilograms, it was reasonably light. Thanks to the wide bang angle, there was a ton of space for a proper induction system. Although fuel injection was considered, 8 custom Delorto 21mm magnesium carburetors were used. Balancing the fuel delivery was not an easy task, and a common practice was to run it at 13,000 rpm until all exhaust pipes were glowing red hot. Engineers would then examine the color difference and adjust fuel jets accordingly. Speaking of exhaust, there were separate pipes of 27mm diameter and 600mm length for the best possible power output. No cats or mufflers, just 8 sand-filled and then hand-bent outlet runners, each exiting randomly around the rear subframe or beneath the engine. It was expected that the engine would have a narrow power band like those tiny two-strokes from later years, so a 6-speed gearbox was developed. During the first testing, the team found out that the power curve was surprisingly broad and the pull was significant, yet from 7,000 RPM. Carcana's obsession with low weight meant that they went with a 4-speed in 1956, which on the other hand turned out to be too much. For the 1957 season, the motorcycle was quite a bit different on the inside than the first model year. Not only was there a 5-speed transmission, but the power plant received various upgrades. Some aimed to increase power, some to enhance reliability, which was not particularly tolerable at the beginning. Things like overheating, cylinder misfires, rod bearing and crankshaft failures were pretty common. Some of its failing points were fixed, such as the crankshaft redesigned by Germans at the Hirth company into the crossplane pattern with thicker crankpins and longer rods to cope with all the internal forces. Now it was a build-up multi-piece crankshaft. Engineers also added 0.5mm valve lift from 6 to 6.5mm, which alongside sharper cams gave the engine a considerable amount of additional power. The engine also featured larger carburetors, and in its latest version, it produced about 79 horsepower at 12,500 RPM. That's about 158 horsepower per liter in 1957. Although it was insanely quick, the power was too overwhelming for the suspension and tires, and it was simply difficult to ride. The streamlined body helped with the aerodynamics, but Ken Kavanagh, the factory rider, believed that it produced lift and reduced front traction at high speeds. A fully ready motorcycle with a rider was at a weight distribution of 45 to 55% front and rear, and that certainly did not help either. The bike required additional development, which it needed received, and nobody was willing to ride it anymore. At Spa in 1957, it was speed trapped at 286 km with a lap record as well. If the battery light did not break, it would win its last race. The Moto Guzzi V8 was an exceptional motorcycle and widely advanced for its time. It took a few decades for the Grand Prix motorcycles to reach such speeds after the V8, as the Guzzi was easily 10 to 15 horsepower up compared to rivaling Gilera or MV Agusta. However, the engine turned at incredible speeds, which brought many troubles. Otherwise, it would be capable of 90 horsepower at 14,000 RPM, but sadly, its development ended in 1957, and so did the glorious Moto Guzzi V8 with that. The only 2 remaining examples are in a museum. They are sometimes brought out to the sunlight and revved up for the crowd.